the spirit of this meeting is to be recorded for the future and to get as many of you to actually hear what so many people around the world have taken from Celan. But I really wanted to also say one more thing, that it's not just an event to see what we can take from Paul Celan, who gave so much in his poetry, but also what we can become in this encounter with this poet Paul Celan. So I'm so pleased, and really it's such a joy to work with so many people together, that everybody found a way to use this medium to talk across continents, languages, idioms, culture, and historical fault lines today. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and friend Amir, who's in Stanford, and then Nitzan, who's in Pennsylvania, and Juliane, who's also here in New York and Brooklyn. Thank you, Nitzan, Amir, Juliane. Thank you, Leah and Isabel, for putting this together. And thank you to all the participants for speaking with us and with Celan today.
Thank you, Uli, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Juliane and Deutsches Haus at NYU for this wonderful event. I'm very moved by our gathering, and to briefly follow up on what Uli just said, Paul Celan's poetry often touches on some of the darkest moments of human history and reminds us of some of the most atrocious acts conducted by human beings in the course of human history. But I believe at the same time, it is also a reminder to all of us what we humans can do through poetry and through art, how we can reach each other, and how we can make each other aware of our ethical and political responsibilities. So I believe that Celan's poetry is not just about the past, it's also about our future together as a common humanity. And on this note, I'd like to pass on the baton to my friend and colleague, Nitzan Lebovic.
Thank you, Uli. Thank you, Amir. And thank you, Juliane and Sarah and the rest of the team at the Deutsches Haus in NYU. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here and talk to you. I'm grateful not only to you, but of course, in a more general sense, that first of all, people, human beings like Paul Celan walked among us, and that there were those who knew how to recognize the greatness of the language and continue to construct a language out of it. And I don't know about you, but I can't hear the words Mandeln, almonds, or Atemwende Brechten, or Niemand, no man, or Ziv without thinking about Celan and a few of those who wrote about him along the years. Some of them are going to join us today. And in that context, I am grateful again that Celan's word has turned into a thread that connects us together as a community, maybe, again, part of which we'll speak here today. And with that, Juliane, it's yours. Take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Uli, Nitzan, Amir. This has been a wonderful collaboration and a very inspiring process for which I'm very, very grateful. And thank you to the 33 contributors who joined us on this celebratory journey from, as Uli said, all over the world, across time zones, across languages. It's been a pleasure. I haven't met many of you in person, but I feel like I know you from your videos. Thank you for your kind contributions and for making this possible at very short notice. I know that's always a bit stressful, but you were so kind and generous, and we appreciate it. I also want to thank Laia Cabrera and Isabelle Duverger, who made this wonderful video possible and who worked through the weekend to make it happen. Thank you, you guys are the best. And of course, my team at Deutsches Haus, Sarah, Christian, Adriana, Nicole, for working tirelessly behind the scenes. You guys also are the best. So there are many the best, but they're all the best. So, and thank you, the audience, for making time today in the middle of the day here, in the morning, elsewhere in the evening, in further Eastern locations. Thanks for putting this on your schedule. And thanks to the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, for their support of this event. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. The video that we will play after I finish my remarks is of all the pre-recorded voices for about 1 hour and 14 minutes. We have the schedule with everybody's exact starting and end time on our website, on the Deutsches Haus at NYU website, under the Celebrating Celan at 100 event, if you want to look it up and are pressed for time. I should also mention that some of the contributions are in other languages. You will hear Hebrew, German, Portuguese, Spanish, English, French. I probably forget something, but so just listen to it and get the feeling for it. If you want to learn German, you can do that at Deutsches Haus, and you can learn all the other languages at other beautiful institutions. So just become more multilingual. It will benefit the world. And what else? Oh, after the video, you will have a chance to share thoughts with us or provide some comments. You can do so through the Zoom Q&A function, which you will see at the very bottom of your screen, and you can submit your thoughts and questions in writing. And if you have to leave early, or if you want to tell other people about this event, we are recording the recording, and once that's been edited, we will post it on the Deutsches Haus at NYU YouTube channel sometime in December. So check in on that and share the news about this project and this birthday. That's the housekeeping. Now I want to share some very short personal remarks. I remember my first encounter with Celan's poetry distinctly. I would say I was about 16 years old, and it was an experience that I could perhaps describe from today's point of view as causing a Wahrnehmungswechsel, a change in my perception, a moment that I've never forgotten. I believe many of us share this kind of profound experience in our response to Celan's work. What a powerful present Celan left behind for us with his words. Today, we offer him a small present with ours. Disjointed yet together, we sing Celan your song. Es ist Zeit.
All souls, what have I done? Inseminated the night as if there could be more nightlier than this one. Bird flight, stone flight, 1,000 described orbits. Gazes looted and plucked. The sea tasted, drunk dry, dreamed away. 1 hour soul eclipse. The next one, an autumn light, burned offering to a blind feeling that came this way. Others, many placeless and heavy with themselves, glimpsed and dodged. Erratics, stars, black and full of language named after an oath silence shredded. And once, when this too is forgotten, the barbed hook felt where the pulse dared the counterbeat.
How Celan read this poem in 1952 in front of German writers. It didn't go over well. They didn't understand what he was trying to do, and he felt frustrated and left feeling misunderstood. It's called Zähle die Mandeln, Count the Almonds, and perhaps, unusually, it's a poem of consolation. Zähle die Mandeln, zähle, was bitter war und dich wach hielt, zähl mich dazu. Ich suchte dein Aug, als du's aufschlug und niemand dich ansah. Ich spann jenen heimlichen Faden, an dem der Tau, den du dachtest, hinunterglitt zu den Krügen. Wie ein Spruch, der zu niemandes Herz fand, behütet. Dort erst tratest du ganz in den Namen, der dein ist. Schrittest du sicheren Fußes zu dir, schwangen die Hämmer frei im Glockenstuhl deines Schweigens. Stieß das Erlauschte zu dir, legte das Tote den Arm auch um dich, und ihr ginget Selbsttritt durch den Abend. Mache mich bitter, zähle mich zu den Manteln. And this is Pierre Jory's translation. Count the almonds. Count what was bitter and kept you awake. Count me among them. I searched for your eye when you opened it and no one looked at you. I spun that secret thread. along which the dew, you thought, slid down to the jars, watched over by a saying that found its way to no one's heart. Only there did you wholly enter the name that is yours. Did you step sure-footed toward yourself? Did the hammer swing free in the belfry of your silence? The overheard reach you, the dead put its arm around you too, and all three of you walked through the evening. Make me better. Count me among the almonds.
This is for the Paul Celan Centenary, and I'm Charles Bambach from the University of Texas at Dallas. In one of his late Jerusalem poems, Paul Celan writes, quote, "I drink wine from 2 glasses and harrow away at the king's caesura," unquote. If there is one word that could characterize the work of Celan, it might be caesura. Not merely the caesura of a displaced political refugee severed from his Bukovinian homeland, but of a human being displaced within his own epoch. We can detect traces of this displacement in the very way Celan writes. I don't think we can properly approach Celan's work unless we attune ourselves to the way he lets the fissures of language show themselves at the fault line of human understanding. Paul Celan is perhaps the poet of this fault line that lies at the heart of language. And his poetic genius is to honor that fissure without attempting to overcome it. Instead, Celan writes at and from the jointure of language that confronts its own disjointure. In doing so, he lets us turn with language as we become the very hinge of that turning, transposed into the king's caesura in all its harrowing displacement, syntactically, poetologically, and in terms of our own being. Es lebe Paul Celan.
Hi, I'm Susan Bernofsky. About 20 years ago, when I was asked to translate this volume by Peter Sondi, Celan Studies, I needed a new translation of Paul Celan's poem Engführung. And I'm going to read for you the translation that I did, which incorporates steals from other translations, particularly Michael Hamburger's. It's an amalgam. Stretto. Deported to the terrain with the unmistakable trace, grass written asunder, the stones white with the shadows of grass blades. Read no more, look no more, go, your hour has no sisters, you are at home. The wheel, slow, rolls out of itself, the spokes climb on a blackish field. The night needs no stars. No one asks after you. No one asks after you. The place where they lay, it has a name, it has none. They did not lie there. Something lay between them. They did not see through it. Did not see, no, spoke of, words. None awoke. Sleep came over them. No one asks after you. It is I lay between you. I was open, was audible. I ticked to you. Your breathing obeyed. It is I still, and you are asleep. It is I still. Years, a finger gropes up and down, gropes around, seams palpable here. It is split wide open. Here it grew up together again. Who covered it? Covered it up. Who? Came a word, came through the night, wished to shine. Ashes. Night and night, go to the eye, the moist one. Go to the eye, the moist one. Cyclones, age-old particle flurry. The other, as you know, as we read in the book, was opinion, was was opinion. How did we touch one another, touch with these hands? It was written, too, that, where? We put a silence upon it, poison-quenched, huge, a green silence, a sepal. There was a thought of vegetation attached to it. Green, yes, attached, yes, beneath a spiteful sky of, yes, vegetation, yes. Cyclones, particle flurry, there was time left, time for an attempt with the stone. It was hospitable, it did not interrupt. How lucky we were. Grainy and stringy, stalky, dense, clumpy and radiate, renal, flattish and lumpish, loose, intricate. It did not interrupt. It spoke, willingly spoke to dry eyes and then closed them. Spoke, was. We did not let go. We stood in the midst, a porous edifice, and it came toward us, came through, stitched invisibly, stitched on the last membrane, and the world, a myriad crystal, shot up. Then nights, unmixed, circles, green or blue, red squares. The world stakes its innermost in the game with the new hours. Circles, red or black, bright squares, no flight shadow, no plane table, no smoke soul ascends and joins in, at owl's flight, near the leprous petrifaction, near our fugitive hands, in the most recent casting out, above the bullet trap on the half-buried wall, visible once more, the grooves, the choruses, once the psalms, Hosanna. So there are temples yet, a star may yet have light, nothing is lost. Hosanna. At owl's flight, here, the conversations, day gray of the groundwater traces. Deported to the terrain with the unmistakable trace, grass, written asunder. Happy 100th birthday, Paul Celan. It's hard to imagine that you have been dead so long, now that I am older than you ever became. I've outlived you and never will. Smoke soul. Happy birthday.
Arnica, hold, entrust, tear, trump out, dim, bruise, admit, dim, stern, waffle, drought, indigo, hot, die in that bush, lesson, naming, nouns, off, where, dim, minds, men, dies, gusts, ribbons, fail, I'm an huff none, hurt, I'm a Duncan, commends wart in hearts and world wizened, uneyed and bent. Arc is unarc is eyes realm crude spatter in fura Deutsche light tears of dear mensch dares admit abort die have muddle cudgel fade in hux moor fold veil.
Paul Celans Muttersprache war Deutsch und sie war die Sprache der Mörder seiner Mutter. Um diese Konstellation geht es zentral und wichtig ist das ganz Besondere an Celans Muttersprache. Denn Celans Mutter war stark auf die deutsche Bildungstradition bezogen, vor allem auf das Wien der Jahrhundertwende. Celan wuchs früh in die deutsche Hochkultur hinein. Seine Vorbilder waren Rilke, George und Rakel. Und dann geschah das abrupt andere. 1941 wurden Celans Eltern von deutschen Kommandos ermordet. Dieser biografische Bruch hatte entscheidende Auswirkungen. Celan suchte nach der Erfahrung des deutschen Massenmords an den Juden nach einer neuen Dichtung. Was seine Vorstellung geprägt hatte, war durch den Nationalsozialismus kontaminiert worden. Die Kunstreligion Georges etwa oder die Dichtungsphilosophie Heideggers. Er wandte sich nun gegen Wohlklang und gegen Schönheit und machte sich auf die Suche nach einer graueren Sprache. Man muss es äußerst ernst nehmen, was er bald zu Protokoll gab. Sein berühmtestes Gedicht, die Tordes Fugue, sei lesebuchreif gedroschen worden. Damit bezog er sich darauf, dass dieses Gedicht früh zu einem Symbol für die Vergangenheitsbewältigung in der Bundesrepublik geworden war. Einer solchen offiziellen Vereinnahmung entzog sich Celan radikal. In seinen Gedichten geht es um Vieldeutiges, um Ambivalenzen, um die Leerstellen. Gerade darin liegt seine Größe. Er eignet sich nicht zur Sakralisierung.
Hello everybody, my name is Jose Anibal Campos. I am a Cuban Spanish writer and literary translator now in Vienna. Thank you very much for the invitation. As a brief tribute to Paul Celan, I'd like to present a new book in Spanish about the month that the poet spent in the Austrian capital between December 1947 and June 1948. This anthology includes some texts that are very well known in the German-speaking world, but however, there are some aspects that, as far as I know, they are completely new. First of all, the very first sign of a critical reception of Celan's poems took place here in April 1948 in a magazine called Die Wiener Bühne. That article was the first reaction to the 17 poems published in the literary magazine Plan in February of that year. The second important aspect is that the first musical piece based on Celan poems was composed by an Austrian musician from Graz in the spring of 1949, when Celan was already established in Paris. It was considered until now that the first compositions inspired by Celan poems were the 5 songs written by Aribert Reimann. And the third new thing, at least for the Spanish-speaking world, is that Celan participated in the first surrealistic exhibition in March 1948 in Vienna, not only reading his poems, but also with his own work of art, from which we only have left a description in the press. A mask fixed to a piece of paper with some tags. Finally, I just want to say, let's continue reading, studying, and celebrating this important poet, not only now, but in the years ahead. Thank you very much again for having me in this tribute.
On April 6, 1970, a few days before his death, Paul Celan answered to a letter he had received from the Romanian poet and longtime friend Nina Cassian. Cassian's letter had come with great delay because of her mother's passing, and she was now hoping to find back into what she called her orbit. In his answer, Celan remembers not the moment, but the moments in which he learned about his own mother's death almost 30 years earlier. The moments, he writes, because I learned about it in fragments with, of course, one day, the big fragment, the terminal fragment. It was on an afternoon. It was bright. Celan adds no further details about his mother's murder in a concentration camp, but the brightness of the afternoon in which that darkest of news reached him led him to formulate the following wish to Cassian. May you, in a opaque clarity, find your orbit again. and he concludes his letter to her with the sentence, "Things decrease, things increase." Sorry for these words of wisdom, he adds in English, quoting the Beatles' Let It Be. Your gaze will enlighten them with meaning.
Olá, o meu nome é Jorge de Freitas. Eu sou um pesquisador brasileiro da poesia de Paul Celan. E é com muita alegria que eu me junto a vocês para celebrar Celan, a pessoa e a poesia. E para isso, eu gostaria de realizar a leitura da tradução para o português feita pelo professor Flávio Renecote do poema Schlaf und Speise, ou em português, Sono e Comida. Sono e comida. O hálito da noite é teu lençol. A treva contigo se aleita. Ela te toca os ossinhos e as têmporas. Te acorda para a vida e sono. Ela te rastreia na palavra, no desejo, no pensamento. Ela dorme em cada um deles. Ela te provoca. Ela te penteia o sal das pestanas, servindo-o para ti à mesa. Ela espreita a areia das tuas horas, colocando-a à tua frente. E o que ela como rosa era, sombra e água, ela despeja em tua taça. Obrigado.
I'm reading the poem Ich trink Wein aus 2 Gläsern, one of the poems Celan wrote upon returning from his visit to Israel in 1969. The poem was written on November 29th, 1969, so 51 years before our own time and before the birthday month we are marking this year. I will read the poem in German and then in translation into Hebrew. The translation is mine. Ich trink Wein aus 2 Gläsern und zackere an der Königszäsur, wie jener am Pindar. Gott gibt die Stimmgabel ab, als einer der kleinen Gerechten. Aus der Lostrommel fällt unser Deut. אני שותה יין משני גביעים, ועובד באדמת מפסק המלך, כמו ההוא באדמת פינדרוס. אלוהים שומט את הקולן, כאחד החסידים הקלושים, מכלי המזלות נושר שמנו.
I'm speaking from Jerusalem, the city that Celan visited just a half a year before his suicide. The city that is claimed by different religions and different peoples over millennia. The city that has no horizon. When Celan wrote to Ilana Shmueli in one of his last poems, Sag, dass Jerusalem ist. Sag, dass Jerusalem ist. I think he was pointing to something open-ended, a prayer perhaps, a prophecy. It may take years, it may take centuries. But he himself unlocked, perhaps, that hermetic or self-contained conversation that had plagued him for so many years, and understood a possibility that we're all hoping for and praying for. Sag, dass Jerusalem ist.
Hello, my name is Ruth Franklin. I'm a book critic and a biographer, and I'm so happy to be part of this event celebrating the centenary of Paul Celan, a poet whose work I've loved for a very long time. I'm going to read a poem called Einmal, Once. And I won't say too much about it, except that it's a very, very short poem that seems to me to go to a very deep and mysterious place. And I'll say also that it contains a strange word, one of Celan's invented words, ichten, a verb made out of the German first-person singular pronoun ich. And in the translation I'm about to read by John Felsteiner, it's rendered as they eyed, as in they became selves, they became people. Einmal, da hörte ich ihn, da wusch die Welt, ungesehen, nachtlang, wirklich. Eins und unendlich, vernichtet, ich denn. Licht war, Rettung. Once, I heard him. He was washing the world, unseen, night-long, real. One and infinite, annihilated, they eyed. Light was, salvation.
Well, I'm not a specialist of Paul Celan, of course, and I don't know his poetry very well, but I must admit that I gave a lot of thought one way and the other, as I will tell, to his most famous poem, the Tordes Fugue, Tordes Fugue, written, I think, in 1946 or just after the war, and which I discovered much later, of course, in the early 70s. Now, there is no doubt that the poem, the Tordes Fugue, is extraordinary in many ways and extremely compelling, extremely powerful, and it sticks in one's mind. I mean, you cannot forget it once you read it. But it also has an inbuilt problem, which created some discussion and which kept me changing my mind for a while, for several years actually. And it's in one sentence, the aestheticization of the Shoah, an aesthetic approach to expressing what the Shoah was, I mean, what Auschwitz was in that case, or the extermination camps, or whatever one wants to see behind the poem. It never is explicit, of course, and it has some sentences which cannot be forgotten. Deine goldene Haare, Margarete, deine aschene Haare. Sulamit, in German, Sulamit, actually, in English translation, Shulamit. In Hebrew, it would be Shulamit. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland, Death is a master from Germany, and so on. I mean, you can't forget the Tordes Fugue, but you wonder, I mean, I did wonder, and I was reinforced by that hesitation when I discovered Adorno's famous saying, no poetry after Auschwitz, or whatever the exact sentence was, but that was the idea. Now, Adorno changed his mind again and went back on this statement, and so did I, but many times regarding Celan. Ultimately, what made my hesitation getting stronger and stronger were two totally different matters. One was my preoccupation with the problem of aestheticization in representing Nazi Germany in film, in novels, in literature in general, which I expressed in Kitsch and Death, Kitsch und Tod in German. I clearly went against it and meant that most of this post-World War II representation of Nazis was kitschy, as was Nazi aestheticization in most of it. But I couldn't really forget that here and there Nazi self-representation really used aesthetics, indirectly Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, and so on. That is mainly Nuremberg. So the danger of re-representing Nazis mainly in film, with this kind of pseudo-aesthetics, the danger of creating a new kind of, what can I say, admiration or whatever. So I became more and more hostile in a way to this, and it extended to poetry like Celan's, to the Tordes Fugue, not to all of Celan's poetry, which, by the way, I didn't know very well, but I knew some of it. And then I also noticed that a painter like Anselm Kiefer used Celan's verses in Tordes Fugue in his own painting, Deine goldene Haare and so on. And I had my hesitation about Kiefer, which, by the way, in the meantime, certainly disappeared. I have great admiration for his paintings. But I also had heard, maybe that's pure invention, I don't know, but I saw it in several places, that the poem, the Tordes Fugue, was put to music and sung in German schools many years, of course, after the war, in the 60s, 70s, 80s maybe, as a poem which the students had no idea what it was about. It was a poem to be sung in choral or whatever. So that, this reinforced my doubts. And I more and more was convinced that Celan did enormously impressive writing, poetry, and not only poetry. His meeting which led to nothing with Heidegger was one of the examples, but also many other things. But in terms of poetry, I am insecure in stating that, but I'm more and more feeling it. His starkest poems, his most non-compromising expressions in verse were, to my mind, his best. Asche, 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 ashes, ashes, ashes.
Hi, I'm honored today to talk about Paul Celan's poetry, and I'd like to ask a very important question here in this context. Why does Paul Celan's poetry have an extraordinary effect on avant-garde Arab poets and on me as a Palestinian poet and translator in particular? And I think that the Holocaust, same as the Nakba, being one of the most barbaric event that could ever happen to any minority in the modern history of humanity, I think I can't find a strong common ground between us. When a poet sees in real a massive destruction, the only thing that he can do is to make a deconstruction of language. And I think that Paul Celan tried to rebuild his own identity, his own multi-layered identity through deconstructing language. And I think that Paul Celan managed to create a new world of trauma, a new Holocaust to German language. Obscurity, surrealism, neologism were most effective strategies in his poetry that really made him express loss and express exile. And I think that a good poetry is a poetry that expresses one's own exile. And that's what really makes him a cosmopolitan poet that I really like. Thank you.
Lifelong with Paul Celan for decades. And the poems meet you each time in a different way, from Corona and the lines like "we stand by the window embracing and people look up from the street, it's time they knew," to the last words on Sabbath, the Shabbat in Sabbath, for the last poem with which I spoke and conversed so much. And in the middle, Jerusalem, that since I've met the Jerusalem poems of Celan, I live and cross this city differently, profoundly, as in the poem Die Pole, the Poles, in the beautiful translation of Michael Hamburger. The Poles are inside us, insurmountable when we are awake. We slip across, up to the gate of mercy. I lose you to you. That is my snowy comfort. Say that Jerusalem is. Sag, dass Jerusalem ist. Say it, as though I were this, your whiteness, as though you were mine, as though without us we could be we. I open your leaves, forever you pray, you bid us free.
This volume was given to me by Ruth Lackner, or Ruth Kraft as I knew her, one of Paul Celan's very early close friends and loves, and also a very close friend of my family. She writes in her dedication, Liebe Marianne, dies Buch wurde dir vorbestimmt, wie du siehst, so schenke ich es dir mit Freude, deine Ruth. And vorbestimmt or predestined, because the first poem in the volume, drawn from Mohn und Gedächtnis, is called Marianne. Marianne, fliederlos ist dein Haar, dein Antlitz aus Spiegelglas. Von Auge zu Aug zieht die Wolke wie Sodom nach Babel. Wie Blattwerk zerpflückt sie den Turm und tobt das Schwefelgesträuch. Dann zuckt ihr ein Blitz den Mund, jene Schlucht mit den Resten der Geige. Mit schneeigen Zähnen führt einer den Bogen. O schöner tönte das Schilf. Geliebte, auch du bist das Schilf und wir alle der Regen. Ein Wein ohnegleichen dein Leib und wir bechern zu 10. Ein Kahn im Getreide dein Herz, wir rudern ihn nachtwärts. Ein Krüglein Bläue, so hüpftest du leicht über uns und wir schlafen. Vorm Zelt zieht die Hundertschaft auf und wir tragen dich zechend zu Grabe. Nun klingt auf den Fliesen der Welt der harte Taler der Träume.
Das gedunkelte Splitterecho. Celan's words often survive as echoes, as fragments torn out of the overall context of the poem in which they stand. Death is a master from Germany, for instance, or Count the Almonds. Shibboleth. Verloren war unverloren. In the rivers north of the future. Eternity stays within limits. If you read Celan's poems more often, again and again, there are some texts that you may not understand, that you cannot explain, but they are words you live with. When George Steiner in his book After Babel called Celan almost certainly the major European poet of the period after 1945, he put him at the end of that great epoch of modern poetry in Europe, which after the Shoah could only articulate itself, a starkling Splinter-Echo. Das gedunkelte Splitter-Echo, Hirnstrom hin, die Buhne über der Windung, auf die es zu stehen kommt. So viel Unverfenstertes dort. Sieh nur, die Schütte müßiger Andacht. Einen Kolbenschlag von dem Gebetssilos weg. Einen und keinen.
A little homage to Paul Celan at 100. Here's a poem I wrote in 1969 after finishing the translation of Atembende, Breath Turn. Iceberg speech, snow script, wanting to break through the unsingable remnant. Foundling poem, seven-edged dice freed from the harness hurdle between out and inside. Treat me to snow, let me know you penetrated one. Thorned eye path. Your poems travel through sleep mountains, etching the acid song into the furrows of what is. Your incandescent error word. Transfigure, sunk finally the last dream-proof skiff where the symbol clings to the broken mast. Said pennant of yesteryear. Oh, to have that distance. Distance is closeness, distance in closeness, a different identity. Your eye eroding last year's snow from your forehead, Je est un autre. And the poem I wrote a couple months ago, after finishing the last poem of Celan's work, translating it. To PC, Paul, if I may, I brought you here to another black soil earth, cousin to, I hope, the black soil of Chernowitz, the meridians of, because in us humans never travel straight lines. They stutter, wander off the straight and narrow, bending psalm breaking into tomorrow's blood-rich marrow.
Hi, my name is Anja Kampmann. I'm going to read a small passage from Paul Celan's Harbor, Hafen. Hier mit bewimperten Segeln fuhr auch Erinnerung vorbei. Langsam sprangen die Brände hinüber, abgetrennt, du, abgetrennt, auf den beiden blau-schwarzen Gedächtnisschuten. Doch angetrieben auch jetzt vom Tausendarm, mit dem ich dich hielt, kreuzen an Sternwurfkaschemmen vorbei, unsere immer noch trunkenen, trinkenden, nebenweltlichen Münder. Ich nenne nur sie. Paul Celan uses the word shooten. A shooten was a very specific kind of boat that was used in the harbor to lead charge of the incoming ships. In Celan's poem, a shooten carries memories just as language does. Although the beloved one is gone, the poem and language still carry the memories on the blue-black Memory-Schuten auf den beiden blau-schwarzen Gedächtnisschuten.
I'm Robert Kaufman. I teach at the University of California at Berkeley in the Comparative Literature Department and in the interdisciplinary program in critical theory. I've been really fortunate this last year and a half to be a part of a new edition of the French poet Jean Dev's book Sous la coupole, translated in English beautifully from the French by Rosemary Waldrop as Under the Dome, Walks with Paul Celan. It's just been published. With my colleague and co-author Philip Gerard, I was really honored to write the introduction to the book. And among the many things we can barely touch on about the importance of the French poet Jean Dev's friendship with Paul Celan, there are translations of one another between 1965 and 1970, when Jean Dev was only 25 and Paul Celan 45. During that time, which is the time period that the memoir is set in and is later written and recalling, Dev and Celan talk about many things, about poetry, about translating, about their histories, about history itself. One of the things that emerges and that they discuss is the then just written poem. In English we call it You Lie in the Great Listening, Du liegst im großen Gelausche. We try to write about it a sort of mini essay in one footnote. It's a famously vexed poem for interpretation, but it's also hit an awful lot of readers without a large interpretive apparatus. The only thing I'll say about it now is that one of the things that is folded into the poem, and it's great listening at a confluence of rivers in Berlin, is the assassination of Rosa Luxemburg and its later historical connections to later events. I'm going to read the poem. I'm going to first read it in the English translation, just slightly amended. Wonderful translation by Pierre Joris. You lie in the great listening, bushed up, flaked up. Go to the Spree, go to the Havel, go to the butcher hooks, to the red apple steaks from Sweden. Here comes the table with the presents. He turns round in Eden. The man becomes a sieve. The woman has to swim, the sow, for herself, for none, for everyone. The Landwehr Canal will not roar. Nothing halts. This is the translation from decades ago by Jean Dev in a collection from Mercure de France titled Sträte et autres poèmes, a beautiful edition of Jean Dev's translations of Celan. This is the poem in French in Jean Dev's translation. Tu reposes dans l'espace d'huile, poisonneux, flocon. Va vers la Spree, va vers la Havel, va vers la longe débouchée, vers la gaffe rouge des pommes de Suède. Arrive la table aux étrennes, et une curve, un Éden. L'homme devenait un passoire, la femme devait nager la truie. Pour elle, pour personne, pour tout. La canal de la Landwehr ne grondera pas. Rien ne sèche. And finally, translated into Spanish, this is a translation mostly from the wonderful Obras Completas made of Celan's complete poetry by the translator and poet José Luis Reina Palazón. There's a bit folded into it of a translation made by the Chilean philosopher and critic Pablo Oyarzún, and I've added just a tiny bit, but most of all, it's the translation of José Luis Reina Palazón from Spain. Tú yaces en el gran escuchar, rodeado de arbustos, de copos rodeado. Ve tú al spray, ve al Havel, ve a los ganchos de carnicero, a las rojas manzanas en varillero de Suecia. Viene la mesa de dones, se lo da en un Edén la vuelta. El hombre llegó a hacerse cedazo, la mujer, la puerca, frotándose tuvo que ver por ella, por nadie, por cualquiera. El canal de Lanver no va a murmurar. Nada queda estancado. Thank you very much. Thanks to the poetry of Paul Celan for all of us.
Hi there. In both published and unpublished notes, Paul Celan keeps referring to poetry as never timeless, but rather as a type of language that, quote, could be grasped only as what passes through time, durch die Zeit hindurchgreifen wollen. In Celan, as in other German Jewish interpreters before and after the Holocaust, time carries the most fundamental value of discontinuity, but also an implicit trust in language, to be able to introduce us to its own misapprehension and inconsistencies. Celan explains its potential in the paradigmatic Meridian speech from October 1960. I quote, "The one who has been addressed becomes a thou, also brings its otherness along into the present, in this present. In the here and now of the poem, it is still possible. The poem itself, after all, has only this one unique, limited present. Only in this immediacy and proximity does it allow the most idiosyncratic quality of the other, its time, to participate in the dialogue. What does it mean to admire such words in the present? It is a commitment, I think, to poetry as what, quote, ceaselessly calls and holds itself back from the now no longer into its still now, as it's translated to English. Es ruft und holt sich unausgesetzt aus seinem schon nicht mehr in sein immer noch zurück. It is a commitment to, quote, the linguistic impossibility of German Jewish letters, as Hannah Arendt explained in relation to Kafka and Benjamin. But beyond that, it is a commitment to the difficulty of thinking with, and possibly beyond that, with a poetry that is never timeless. Thank you.
Toward the end of his famous essay, The Task of the Translator, Walter Benjamin speaks of translations that prove to be untranslatable because of the looseness with which meaning attaches to them. For confirmation of this claim, he turns to Hölderlin's Sophocles translations, noting that in them the harmony of languages is so profound that sense is touched by language only the way an Aeolian harp is touched by the wind. For this reason, he continues, Hölderlin's translations are subject to the enormous danger inherent in all translations. The gates of a language, thus expanded and modified, may slam shut and enclose the translator with silence. Hölderlin's translations from Sophocles were his last work. In them, meaning plunges from abyss to abyss until it threatens to become lost in the bottomless depths of language. Close quote. Telling here is the contrast Benjamin draws between the plunge from abyss to abyss and the bottomless depths of language. What does it mean to plunge from abyss to abyss? What is the difference between one abyss and another? How does a plunge from the one to the other at once carry out and stave off an ultimate descent into the bottomless depths of language? I have no clear answer to these questions and have no choice but to leave them open. In their openness, however, they resonate with my experience of reading Celan, Celan the poet, Celan the translator. With no other poet have I had such a visceral experience of having the bottom repeatedly fall out, of plunging from abyss to abyss. Every time I had the feeling that sense had been touched by language, the contact would give way. Every time I trusted that the language in question was German, I was soon made to hear another, and yet another, reverberating through it. This was the case, for example, in my reading of the syllable pain, where the gates of German expanded in such a way as to allow other languages, Hebrew, French, and Latin, to speak through them. And it wasn't only other languages, but linguistic fragments, flotsam and jetsam, which seemed to have no place in any one particular language. These fragments, too, made themselves heard. Becoming audible, they themselves seemed to call for a hearing, and above all, to call for an altogether different way of listening. No poet has so challenged me to listen again and again, to attend to the ways in which meaning, fixed, stable, and reassuring, would repeatedly slip away. And as this fixity, this ground, this precarious hold would at some point give way, I would fall. At times the plunge was exhilarating. Most of the time it was terrifying. For I have sensed at all times what can only be described as a terrible undertow in Celan's verse, the pull of those bottomless depths of language of which Benjamin speaks. As I have gradually come to realize, there is nothing firm to hold on to in Celan's verse. Units of meaning disintegrate as words break into syllables, syllables into letters, letters into sticks and spikes and splinters. As meaning disintegrates, voices break into perseverating stutters. Thus, for example, the syllable pain breaks down in the end into the stammering of a broken word, and then further into the splintering of a single letter. Buch, 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 stabiota, stabiota. Spell, spell, spelled out, out. To the plunge from abyss to abyss, Benjamin describes, there is, however, a stop. Aber es gibt ein Halten, he says. There are then, it would seem, ways to hold on to meaning, to keep it from giving way, to prevent it from opening onto unfathomable depths. For whatever reason, these were not the ways Celan could go. For him, Benjamin's Halten was not a stop, but a holding fast to an abyssal plunge, no matter where it might take him.
One of my favorite poems by Paul Celan is a rather unexpected one, and one that is not very well known. It is called Sprüchlein Deutsch. Sprüchlein Deutsch, entdinglichte Welt, erfürchtet, erwirklicht. Konstanze heute wäre ein Tag, Dora Diamant heute ein Leben. What is Sprüchlein Deutsch? And what are these women's names, Constanze and Dora Diamant, doing there? And what relates these two? Celan is invoking here one of the earliest texts of German literature, one of the Merseburger Zaubersprüche. More particularly, the Zauberspruch, the verse spell, that talks about women, or rather female goddesses, who were Todesbegleiterinnen, those who accompanied dying warriors to the netherworld. Celan wrote this poem in 1968, 2 years before his death. This poem is about women and how they related to their men when they as they lay dying. Constanze heute wäre ein Tag. Who is Constanze? Well, she could be Mozart's notoriously unfaithful wife who was at a ball in a spa in Baden while Mozart was dying. Ironically, Constanze, Fickel Constanze, is called by a name that invokes constancy, as in John Donne's poem on women's constancy. Now thou hast loved me one whole day, tomorrow when thou leavest, what wilt thou say? One whole day, Constanze, heute wäre ein Tag. Now it is significant that Constanze obviously, or at least Mozart's Constanze, does not coincide with her name. Celan contrasts this to Dora Diamant, the woman Kafka loved in the last year of his life. Dora Diamant was there as Kafka was on his deathbed. Diamant, unlike Constanze, does coincide with her name. Diamond is forever. Dora Diamant would be a companion for life. The Merseburger Zaubersprüche are about a language that has an effect on reality. In Celan's own verse spell, this Sprüchlein Deutsch, this magical language, has its own cryptic magic when he associates the Jewish girl from a Hasidic family from Eastern Europe with the German goddesses of the Merseburger Zaubersprüche.
We live under gloomy skies, and there are few humans. That is why there are also so few poems. This quotation shows that Paul Celan had a highly charged notion of the poem and of the human, and that both are indivisibly connected. Celan with his poetics is far from being only the poet of the Holocaust. He is also the poet of humanity, the poet who, after the disaster, wanted to rebuild humanity in poetry. Half a year before his death, he still spoke of his determination to hold one's position within the human. He remained not without hope for human today and tomorrow. The human is a core and the direction of his poetry. He defined this human at one point as follows: a unique and mortal soul being that searches, with voice and silence, a path. His poems provide an access to this high claim of being human. They are written for the sake of the humans. They are a reminder of the absolute necessity for humanity to go into one's own depth, to cultivate one's inner life.
I am going to read a poem for Paul Celan's birthday. The one I've chosen comes from the late volume Fadensonne. You have it on your screen. Deine Augen im Arm, your eyes in your arm, is the poem, and I translated it myself. It's a short poem written late in life by a very anxious Paul Celan, and you'll see yourself. Is it a love poem? Is it written to himself? Much to speculate on, and I hope you find it interesting. Deine Augen im Arm, die auseinandergebrannten, dich weiterwiegen im Fliegen, den Herzschatten, dich. Wo? Mach den Ort aus, mach's Wort aus, lösch, misch, Aschenhelle, Aschenelle, geschluckt, Vermessen, entmessen, verortet, entwortet. Aschen. Schluck auf deine Augen. Im Arm. Immer. And in English, and of course no translation can really capture it, your eyes in your arm, the scattered by fire, continuing to cradle you in the flying heart shadow, you. Where? Make out the place, make out the word, turn off, mix, ash, brightness, ash, swallowed, mismeasured, unmeasured, located, unworded, where? Ash, hiccup, your eyes in your arm, always. Thank you very much.
On Paul Celan's 100th birthday, it is worth remembering his unique ability to connect different corners of Europe. I would like to share a translation that he drafted in the margins of a Romanian collection his friend Nina Kasian sent to him in 1965. This was toward the end of his own life. His own poetry was dark and compact, but he still captured joy and vitality in the writing of others as beautifully as ever. Kasian's poem is called Joco cu Portocala, play with an orange. Ine mine Dine, ein Wurzel nach oben Wald, ein offener Mund mit Welle, ein geflügelter Knopf, ein Zwerg von der Haselnuss gefressen und die Apfelsine. Ein Weg dreimal umgebogen, an seinem Ende eine Bäckerei, darin die Samteule wohnt, die goldgelbe Biene und die Apfelsine. Eine Honigschlange, ein Filzschlüssel, Sterne erfroren, einzeln verloren, ein Mond in der Nacht, unter ihnen die Apfelsine. The translation starts out probingly, then gains rhythm and structure, and by the third stanza, Celan is quite literally playing with Kasian's orange. He gives the last stanza a tight form and a beautiful flow. Nina Kasian was one of Celan's oldest friends. They were part of the same close-knit group of aspiring poets in Bucharest from 1945 to 1947. Some of Celan's most memorable poems in German were drafted under the critical eye of his Romanian peers, and he remained close to them until the end of his life.
Celan's use of Hebrew words in his poems is often described as an insertion of the absolute foreign and uninterpretable into his already enigmatic poetry. But in the lines Im Gestirn des Lieds, das beginnt Hachnisini, in the song's constellation, the song that begins Hachnisini, I see a different possibility. Celan refers here to a poem by Chaim Nachman Bialik, the great poet of the Hebrew revival, which is addressed to a lover who is asked to let the speaker in under her wing. Celan quotes not only this supplication, Hachnisini, but also Bialik's reference to the starry sky. Both poems, then, are oriented toward the same sphere of celestial navigation that frames Celan's description of the poem as a meridian. And when the word Hachnisini is written in Hebrew script, as it was in the version of the poem that Celan sent in a letter to Ilana Shmueli, the two facing lines, the song that begins in German and Hachnisini in Hebrew, also provide a visual image of the encounter between a speaker and an addressee. The two lines can thus be read as a pictogram of Bialik's supplication, let me in, Hachnisini, of Celan's mournful love poem to Shmueli, and of the encounter enabled by the poem according to the meridian speech.
The Glut, a poem Paul Celan wrote on a very hot day after he visited to Jerusalem Al-Quds in October 1969. I read first in German. Die Glut zählt uns zusammen im Eselschrei vor, Abschaloms Grab, auch ihr Gethsemane drüben, das umgangene, wenn überäuft Am nächsten der Tour tut sich nichts auf. Über dich, offene, trag ich dich zu mir. Now the Hebrew translation with Arabic interventions. החום הלוהט על חררית הוא מונה אותנו יחד עם נעירת החמור סרחת אל-חימארי מול יד אבשלום גם כאן גת שמנים שנעקפה שם מעבר מי נערם תחתיה בשער הבא לא נפתח דבר מעלייך הפתוחה על מפתוח הוא אני נושא אותך אליי.
Willkommen im Surkamp-Haus in Berlin-Mitte. Ich freue mich, Matthias Weichelt, den Chefredakteur von Sinn und Form, einer berühmten Zeitschrift, vorstellen zu können.
Vielen Dank, Thomas Spahn. Ein paar Worte zu Sinn und Form. Es ist eine Zeitschrift, die 1949 in Ostdeutschland gegründet worden ist, mit dem Ziel, ein erstklassiges literarisches Journal zu schaffen, das auch im Westen wahrgenommen und gelesen wird. Diese Haltung von Sinn und Form der großen Offenheit, der Liberalität, des Setzens auf internationale Autoren, auf erstklassige Literatur wurde in den Zeiten des Kalten Krieges immer schwieriger. Und der Gründungschefredakteur von Sinn und Form, Peter Huchel, wurde deswegen auch 1962 entlassen. Und in seinem Abschiedsheft, das später als auch berühmt werden sollte, das hat er als eine Art, wir sehen es hier auch, die Originalausgabe, er hat dieses Abschiedsheft als einen Akt des Widerstandes gegen die von ihm als repressiv empfundene Kulturpolitik der DDR konzipiert, hat Beiträge von Brecht, von Aragon und von Paul Celan veröffentlicht. 2 Gedichte und eine Übersetzung. Er hatte Celan 1957 in Wuppertal kennengelernt, hat später 1959 die Tordes Fugue als eines der berührendsten KZ-Gedichte bezeichnet und hat später sich nach Erscheinen des Heftes bei Celan bedankt dafür, dass seine Gedichte dem Heft die rechte Ordnung, das rechte Gewicht gegeben haben.
Ein Akt des Widerstands war die Veröffentlichung der ersten Gedichte von Paul Celan in der damaligen DDR in der Zeitschrift Sinn und Form. Ein Widerstand sollte es bleiben. In den späten 80er Jahren, in der Endzeit der DDR und der ganzen sowjetischen hegemonialen Sphäre, wurden die Gedichte von Paul Celan als widerständige Gedichte, als Oppositionsdokumente gelesen. Es wird Zeit, dass der Stein sich zu blühen bequemt, so heißt es in einem Gedicht. Und genau diese Gedichtzeile hat man auf die versteinerten politischen Verhältnisse in der damaligen DDR bezogen. Gerade hier in Mitte und im Prenzlauer Berg wurde Celan so wahrgenommen, ein Dichter des Widerstands.
Augen weltblind im Sterbergeklüft. Ich komm, Hartwuchs im Herzen, ich komm. Eyes world blind in the death crevice. I come, hard growth in the heart, I come. These lines from the poem Schneebett encapsulate so much of Celan's work. We have the strange syntax, to whom or what do the eyes in the death crevice belong? We have the neologisms, hard growth, that give his poetry its unmistakable weight. We have the pairing of organic and inorganic matter, flesh and stone, biology and geology. Finally, we have the movement of the speaker who would appear to be summoned to the realm of the dead, like a latter-day Orpheus who descends into the deep, albeit without the possibility of return. In the Phaedo, Plato argued that to practice philosophy is to learn to die. One must abandon the cares of the world and escape the constraints of the flesh to ponder eternal mysteries and to gain access to timeless truths. One could say that for Celan, to write poetry is to learn to die, with the crucial difference that learning to die does not mean rising above oneself, but submitting instead to one's own finitude and the finitude of language. Celan's poetry engraves in language the sound of an individual, the lilt of a voice. It turns what is passing into something hard, so that we can read in the interstices of the poem the path of one who has departed and whose departure now stands facing us. Poetry brings back what is gone, not as a living presence or even a phenomenon, but as crystals that grow in the cavity of the heart. Etwas, das gehen kann, trostlos, wie Herzgewordenes kommt. Something that can go without a greeting, like what has become heart comes.
I am going to read a very short poem, Fadensonnen, from the volume Atemwende, first in German and then in Pierre Joris's translation. Fadensonnen über der grauschwarzen Ödnis. Ein baumhoher Gedanke greift sich den Lichtton. Es sind noch Lieder zu singen jenseits der Menschen. Thread suns above the grey-black wastes. A tree-high thought grasps the light tone. There are still songs to sing beyond mankind.
Wir lagen schon tief in der Macchia, als du endlich herankrochst. Doch konnten wir nicht hinüberdunkeln zu dir. Es herrschte Lichtzwang. We were lying deep in the macchia by the time you crept up at last, but we could not darken over to you. Light compulsion reigned. Nous gisions, déjà au plus profond des maquis quand tu t'es enfin approché en rampant, mais nous ne pouvions pas ténébrer vers toi. Il régnait la contrainte de lumière. Già stavamo distesi, nel profondo della macchia, allorché tu finalmente ti accostasti carponi, ma non potemmo unirci a te. Attraverso il buio regnava luce coatta.
Well, welcome back. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Incredible. I'm so moved. It's incredible. It was incredible. I want to say again, thank you to everyone who read and actually shared this with us. It was such an experience. It was amazing. Thank you so much. I don't even know what to say. Amir, Nitzan, Juliane, you have to say something. I wrote down everything I heard. I have a note for every single speaker.
Well, I'm so glad that we will be able to listen to all these voices again and again, because it's so rich and it's impossible to grasp it all in one go. What a spectrum and what creativity in this limitation of the small format. Astounding.
I think I also wanted to say, Marianne Hirsch wrote this to me, but we heard a lot of different accents also. And Marianne Hirsch is one of the few people who probably still speaks with Czernovich German accent. And I love the fact that people actually, we heard actually time and history speaking through people. That different accents and what people have gone through and what language they accessed with Celan, which is really beautiful, very singular, really an incredible experience. Kind of what Nitzan said, sort of it brings out the strangeness in the you. The you brings his or her own strangeness into dialogue. It's not a dialogue that eliminates difference, but actually allows someone to be in their time. For me, it was just incredible. So I'm really kind of sprachlos, speechless.
That's Celan too, Uli, you know, speechlessness and silence. There was also a beauty in the silence between the various contributions, and these moments in which you stop for a moment and then aesthetic of silence.
And I thought this idea that several poems were really, several of the contributions were about love poems. And they were about the same poems or the letters that Celan wrote to some of the people he loved. And that when you just said that speechlessness in poetry we don't know what it signals or what it references. We don't know actually that it opens up something and it opens up this possibility. And I love the fact that several people said that they walk through their city now with different eyes. They see Jerusalem differently, or that it opens up something that's yet unknown. I think Celan's what I get is that it opens up something yet unknown. It's not a singular reference.
Just wanted to mention that there are like a lot of thank yous coming in the comment sections, and people saying how touched and moved they are by all the contributions. So everybody's seconding these thoughts, and I think also it was almost like ein Reigen, but an open one that's not truly connected, and I hope it will continue. And maybe we can add more voices like for this video, and certainly everybody can join in and think about their encounters with Celan and his work, and what poems were particularly meaningful to them, and revisit on this day of his 100th birthday. And we don't have to, it seems people don't really have any questions, so we don't have to keep it going, but I just wanted to thank everybody again. It was a really meaningful experience working on this and creating this beautiful image and voice compilation. So many differences, so many commonalities, and so many beautiful contradictions.
Juliane, since you said something earlier, how you encountered Celan first and Nitzan, Amir, we talked about this a little bit. And Nitzan, in your reference where Celan says, you bring yourself into conversation in your difference and with your time. Maybe the two of you could say something also, because there's also, I really love the fact that people listen to German, that, Nama said that Hebrew is not an intrusion, but opens up yet another level of references, that there was Portuguese, there was Italian, there was Spanish, there was different languages. So it's not one language, but maybe for the two of you to say how you came to Celan or what he does for you. And Amir, you presented your own translation, what that even means for you to translate, and we speak German and English, the two of us, and then you translate this German poet who in this reading showed up several times in Jerusalem in his connection to Israel. We've talked about that. Maybe how the two of you came to Celan. I think that would be really interesting for people to hear.
Thank you. So I'll just say that just like you, Juliane, I encountered him for the first time when I was 16. So there's something magical, I guess, about this age. Growing up in Haifa, Israel, and the poetry in translation into Hebrew by Manfred Winkler left me speechless. I mean, there was an immediacy to it that left me speechless. And I believe in retrospect that reading Celan in Hebrew and understanding that translation can achieve only so much was one of the reasons why I wanted to learn German and read Celan in the original. So for me to translate Celan into Hebrew is not the closing of a circle, but is a very important moment, in life. And he accompanied me, ever since in thinking, in writing my own poetry, in teaching, in thinking about what poetry has to offer to us. So he belongs in a very small group of, writers and artists I find myself coming back to time and again. And I'm very moved to see students here all the way in California who are reading Celan and know very little about him and about his poetry, touched and react strongly to him and make him a part of their lives. So there are various, moving aspects to Celan's work for me personally and intellectually.
Nitzan, before you go, let me just ask you, Amir, because someone said this, how, I can't remember, I wrote it down somewhere, I'll find it. Someone said that some words stay with us and you cannot hear certain words, like Mandeln, Lichtzwang. And what words for you, because you live in English and German and Hebrew, what words actually you hear and they are Celan's words?
You know, the word came up once in the course of this event, and the word is Rettung. Mm. So I think for me, this element of Rettung, of life that comes after the event is really central.
I wanted to add maybe to what Amir just said, linking that actually to a previous event you had at the Deutsches Haus. In the previous event, which is also on the YouTube channel, you can view Paul Auster and Pierre Joris talking, and Pierre Joris actually used an interesting image there. He talked about the verticality of the words in Celan, an image I really liked. And I find, you know, the question of the presentness, right, of us coming into the poetry and introducing ourselves to the poetry as a form of, you know, adding a synchronous element, if you like, to the verticality of the words, because of course we meet them at a certain point, but what we meet is already mediated in some ways with the translations, with the interpretations, with a certain, again, cultural, poetic, literary, historical, philosophical context or community. You know, Winkler, who Amir mentioned, or Tuvia Rübner, or Shimon Zandbank, the translators. Later, of course, the translators to English and French and so on, that we got to know. And the biographers, Felstiner and others, which I think had a huge impact on me as, again, a growing teenager in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Were very influential. And I think, you know, I tend to think about Celan not just as a poet within a poetic language per se that is disconnected, dissociated from the historical semantics, that verticality, but someone who introduces me to whole worlds, you know, different worlds that I can enter and go out or connect in different and many ways.
This also needs about this verticality that Pierre Joris described, that the word goes down, it doesn't just refer out. And then Thomas Baer, Matthias Weichelt said he was a poet of resistance. He has this kind of status. For me also, and for Juliane maybe as well, as someone who grew up in Germany until I went to high school and then lives in America, Celan, I was just thinking about this, listening to people today, that Celan also did something for German language and culture, which is that people can hear certain things and are allowed to hear them who are not native speakers or who never learned German. And when Anja Kampmann talked about this metaphor of these boats that carry memories, blau-schwarze Gedächtnisschuten, I kept on hearing the word shoot, which I hear through Felstiner's and Joris' translations of Tordes Fugue as shooting, which is not what you're supposed to hear, because German, that has nothing, there's no relation, it's just the same sound. And Michael Levine talked about actually how the sound sometimes, so you can start to hear resonances in a word that actually are not properly there. But I think Celan was really invested in this, not limiting language to what it properly can do, but forcing it to what it actually wasn't supposed to do, to take it beyond that. And I think to hear across languages, and I loved Marjorie Perloff and Charles Bernstein, that they created new things in English out of Celan. And that, I mean, the two things really made me laugh. And what made me really laugh is Bernstein's I am a Duncan Den. Ich bin ein Denkender, which is like this weird in between English, German, he's thinking, or Duncan or thinking. It was just funny and kind of, I think that Celan has this very determined sense that language can do more than what people have wanted it to do. And there's a kind of, occasionally there's an exuberance, Vivian Liska talked about, it's very erotically charged. Celan comes out of a tradition of romantic poetry, which is not just romantic, but erotic. The people, he likes Trakel Rilke, it's very charged physical language. And I think that's one thing that you get. And I don't know if Juliane, you feel this also, that there's, as a native German speaker, I think it's always been very hard to hear German spoken in public in another place. And so Celan opens up another dimension. He doesn't make it easier, but he gives it this verticality, Nitzan said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I remember this sort of, it sounds a little strange, but almost this blitzartige Erkenntnis, what the German language could be also. And that being a liberation, but also a weight, and to negotiate that space in between these two that I felt when I first encountered him. And it was very discombobulating and destabilizing, but also extremely, how should I put that? Yeah, a liberation.
Let me just maybe add one last thing in that connection, that blitz, that flash that we're talking about, of again, that presentness coming in. And I'm so happy. I was very deeply touched by all the videos, but in a particular way, maybe particularly touched by the way Rimra Naim and Galili introduced the Arabic into it, which was beautiful and very innovative, and introduces us into, again, a new world here as well.
Yeah.
Maybe very briefly on that note, reminding us of Saul Friedlander's contribution, which I found extremely, insightful and important. And one could sense, how, he still, struggles with the poetry and struggles with Celan and the questions, his poetry raises, which I think is a very important facet of remembering Celan and reading Celan. Understanding that poetry is also an invitation, to an open conversation in which we don't always agree. We can remain, in disagreement, where we have different perspectives. So just briefly to remind us of that element of Celan's poetry.
Well, Friedlander said something. He said, "You can't forget Tordes Fugue, but you wonder." And I kind of thought, this wondering that he now for decades has been wondering what is the right thing. And then right after him, Reem Ganayem, as Nitzan said, poetry expresses our own exile, but it's specific exile. It's not generic kind of existential homelessness. It's very specific. So she put the Nakba next to the Shoah and said there's a specificity. And I think Celan's insistence on using language that even for Germans, native speakers, people always have to say that, is very difficult and very specific. You think he's driving at the specificity of one's experience that is catastrophic, marked by loss, and yet maybe can be shared. So I think, Nitzan, you're totally right that he introduces, or Galil introduces Arabic into it here, opens up another part. And Amir and I have talked about this in another one of Juliane's really well-produced events. What do the Jerusalem poems see, and what do they not see? What Amir talked about, what is not visible, what is visible, the presence of Palestinian life in that city. So I think you're right, it opens up another, and I think there's a question in the chat, why there's so many professors of comparative literature. Because Celan is probably not as easily forced into one national identity or a language or literature, which is a bizarre idea that literature matches nationality. And when, I don't know how you introduce Celan to your students, it's another question, how do you teach to young students when you introduce Celan? Is he a German poet?
Well, I think to invoke Walter Benjamin here, I think Celan writes in the language of poetry. And the language of poetry is Ursprache, it's the Ur language we all share. And maybe that's one of the reasons why, if Arabic is your native tongue, you can relate to it, or German, or Hebrew, or French, or Portuguese, or Spanish. There's something unique, I think, to his poetry, his capacity to, beautifully, masterfully write in this Ursprache.
Like, I also think what Celan is today, I mean, part of what we wanted to do is to celebrate him today. And I think what all these testimonials say, there's a future and there's yet open space. And I was just really delighted to see, people working, recovering what he did in Vienna, people working in Portuguese, people working in new languages that probably they hadn't been mapped so much. And the status of Celan in Germany is, as Friedlander referred to really briefly, and someone else said, the poems were used to teach something, right? Juliane and you probably encountered them also. I never encountered them in high school. Who knows? My German teachers maybe didn't. They did Brecht.
No, we did. There was an extensive reading in Gymnasium, and I found it interesting what Helmut Boettiger said in his comment that he was like Lesebuch reif gedroschen, and that you can see too. And I see both components. I see the importance of reading him as a young human being to have that effect that I was lucky to experience. But of course, you also get this idea of the kids. Oh, now there's the Lesebuch. Now we have to talk about this, and I think it's both. You see it both ways. And something else that I wanted to say. In one of the comments, Vivian Liska, one of our contributors, talks about what we have created as a Flaschenpost, right? A message in the bottle. And I just thought it's nice we have created this Flaschenpost to be sent into space and time and to be opened by people at various shores. And Vivian, I like that idea. Thank you for that beautiful comment.
What I want to add one thing, since this is recorded. So I think what has been very, very complicated and difficult is to not locate Celan only in reference to the Holocaust as the only historical reference. So I think when Reem Ghanayem said the Nakba is in here, I think what Michael Levine said may be helpful to say. It moves from abyss to abyss. It doesn't mean that one abyss is not abyssal. It doesn't mean that it's been mastered or covered or understood. And that I think what Amir, you're saying, and I would love to, Rettung, salvation, doesn't mean one has forgotten, one has forgiven, one has gotten over it, but it allows one to perhaps perceive the other's loss as well, as their own loss, not as, oh, this is my loss, it must be like yours. There's nothing, maybe that's another way of saying everybody's in comparative literature, but there's an incommensurability, an incomparability. There's nothing to be compared here, but there's still the possibility of connection.
Uli, this moment when Celan prepares his Meridian address, the speech he delivers upon receiving the Büchner Prize. He writes these notes to himself. He drafts various stages of, the address. And in one place, he speaks about poetry as eine Schule wirklicher Menschlichkeit, a school of real humanity. So he does see, for poetry, the capacity to teach us real humanity, not humanity, or humanism in the general, but real, by being what it is. And I think this is an incredible phrase, and a phrase that allows us to, reread and re-experience his poetry along the lines of what you're saying. It's not about a particular experience alone. It's not alone about the Jewish experience, in modern times. It's really about the human experience. It's about our responsibility to take this experience as his poetry teaches us and do something with it.
And this is what concludes his speech in Tel Aviv, right? In Israel. This is the very last line, which, is connected and related to the Meridian speech, right? And that goes back to what Sidra, DeKoven, and Ezrahi was talking about as the Jerusalem East, right? The ease. What is the ease? The ease that is, a comprehensive understanding of a certain past and the event, and then the reception or the understanding of the event, but also how the language allows us to open that into a new future, into new horizons.
And I love that a lot of people focused on individual words. Ruth Franklin, this idea Ichten, which is short for Dichten, but also it's not short at all for anything, to become oneself or selfing or something like that. And the final poem, because we went from A to Z, right, from Paul Auster's Aller Seelen to Lichtzwang with Zanetti. The last one, I remember my late teacher, Jeffrey Hartman, who, when I started writing on Celan, said in a very direct way, well, make me believe that Celan matters as a poet. That was my assignment. So I wrote a book trying to make Jeffrey Hartman believe it's worth his time. The word that interested him the most was Lichtzwang. And he said, what does it mean to be forced into the light? Does it mean to be exposed, to be examined, interrogated, or does Lichtzwang mean that light will come, that it's more like Rettung? And this kind in a small German word, light compulsion, forced into the light forcing, or something like that. Hartman was really, I think he always stayed in that kind of tension, like Saul Friedlander. He said, it stays with me, but I wonder. And I think that is actually something we wanted to do today, that we were not conclusive. And I think, Juliane, I mean, we're going to ask you whether you'll allow it to be a little bit, we could edit this. And I also wonder, I don't know what people in the audience even think, whether we should have subtitled this into one language. I think our idea was not to create one dominant language and say everything has to be into English. So we really loved the fact that everybody was willing to give a part of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm afraid I'll have to leave now.
We have other things to teach and other things to do.
This went on much longer than I thought, which is wonderful, but also creates certain external pressures in terms of daily life. But if you guys want to keep talking, that's fine with me.
I just want to repeat saying thank you so much. So Nitzan, Lehigh University, Amir at Stanford University, Juliane at Deutsches Haus. So part of what Celan also allows us to do is to work together, and to the audience and to the 33 contributors. I just want to say thank you. So vielen Dank.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Your thank you is shared by all of us, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, indeed.
Happy birthday, Mazel Tov.